Dune 2 is a 2024 science fiction film directed by Denis Villeneuve. Obviously, the sequel to the first Dune movie. If you're watching this movie, you're probably familiar with the series already. I'm just going to go over a few points that I enjoyed from the sequel, and we'll call it a day. I like the second one a decent amount more than the first one, and I think there's a couple main reasons for that. There's a narrower focus in the sequel. The original film has a lot of lifting to do in terms of establishing the world, houses, aesthetics, status of the story, even like a lot of plot details. There's not necessarily a lot of time to have big payoffs to what the film is presenting, in my mind. The second film does not have the burden of establishing the framework of the world. It is able to jump right into Fremen culture and events that are already established and already in motion. And it benefits a lot from this because we get more time with different cultures to establish their identities more, to learn a little bit more about them, to have events associated with them feel a little bit more meaningful. A lot of this movie, of course, has to do with the Fremen in the desert. So we get more of a look inside their structure, into their customs, their mythology. And that helps a lot because Paul's fate becomes tied to theirs and really becomes the same as theirs. So given that fact, we of course need more time with them. We need more time to make their events feel more impactful. So even though we get some stuff that feels less directly relevant, right? Like in terms of Paul doing his training, becoming a Fremen, that's all fine because it's still painting the portrait. It's connecting us to the people. Even if the events of him, becoming a Fremen, undergoing the trials, riding the worm, is less utilitarian. One other thing this affords us is a little bit more time with the Harkonnen, because to me, at least, in the first movie, they were a little bit of a generic villain. The head boy, the Baron guy, was kind of like a evil genie in a certain sense, like with his loopholes and his, political maneuvering and like, oh, I didn't say I'd let you live. I just said I'd set you free. And we don't really get too much more than that. We get loose glimpses of their homeworld, as I recall. We get like inside of a couple rooms or whatever, but there's never too much of a distinct impression of that people formed. But this movie gives us the chance for that. And I'm going to touch on the Harkonnen a little bit more later. But essentially, there's more time in this movie to elaborate on some details to give us more of an impression of certain things, which make the experience a lot richer and enable certain payoffs, enable bigger jaw-dropping moments to have weight behind them. And another big bump, I think, is kind of tied to the ability of the film to spend more time on important things and less time on establishment. And that's the direction of certain character arcs and payoffs. I don't think the first movie had zero good character moments, but I do think the ones that were present were pretty quick, and they were just individual moments rather than payoffs to arcs that seemed especially rich. This film has the sort of anti-hero turn that both Paul and his mother take. I think that lends a whole lot of depth to the film because up to this point, right, the story had been a little bit of a boilerplate Messiah type of story. And you would kind of expect the natural ascension of that to be, Paul comes back from the dead and he's great. He's going to lead, his good guy soldiers to victory and so on and so forth. But he takes on that evil tinge that his mother has after drinking the life water as well. And I think that's a great touch to provide a slightly different experience than the audience is probably expecting going in. I really like the idea of this Messiah figure not just being unadulterated good, but having a side of darkness to him in a certain sense. We know he's doing it with the knowledge that, like, he can see the future. He knows what has to be done. So we can assume he still has good motives, but nonetheless, the way he's carrying himself and the way his mother's carrying himself too, as a sort of foreshadowing of his turn, is really unique. And I appreciate the fact that the character goes in that direction. I think that gives the movie a nice extra dynamic. One other thing I like, this kind of carries over between the two movies, is the role that architecture plays in descriptions, I suppose. The houses and the peoples kind of have their portraits painted by their aesthetics. The Fremen have something that's more easily identifiable to us. This sort of, Middle Eastern, kind of Egyptian in a certain sense. Lots of sand, stone carvings, lots of desert. I think that's something that we have seen depicted in, like history books, things like that, that we can latch onto a little bit more. And it's an identifiable aesthetic. The Harkonnen are much more alien by contrast, not just in their appearance, right? Like they're still humanoid, but obviously altered, but also in the aesthetic of their world, right? Like the sun that turns everything black and white, the kind of twist on fireworks that they have, the monolithic, imposing sort of architecture. And I think this is especially important for the Harkonnen because, like I said earlier, in Dune 1, they're just kind of a generic villain. This movie, we don't get, I think, great individual characterization of the individual Harkonnen royalty. But I'm not necessarily holding that against the film a lot because what it's more concerned with in the way it presents itself is the broad strokes. It's characterizing the people of Harkonnen, like the characteristics of that planet, that race. And it does that through these sweeping visuals, the visual depiction of the world, the visual depiction of the gladiator pits. It's doing so by drawing those visual contrasts between something more familiar with the Fremen and something more alien with the Harkonnen. So both of them have their characteristics as a general group painted by their aesthetics. And that's something I really enjoy a lot because these two films are heavily concerned with visual flourishes and visual detail and visual scope and the size of not just objects, but the scope of conflicts we're being presented with, right? Like these are galactic. Actually, I guess I don't know if they're galactic. These are, interplanetary conflicts involving multiple powerful houses. Like these things we're seeing have huge ramifications. And part of communicating that is communicating literal scale, kind of priming us for the scope of events we're about to see. I think this is nicely exemplified with that quick scene of Leia Seydoux' character as seducing the one, son of the Baron or whatever. That scene is kind of over the top if you take it out of context in a certain way. When she goes into like her room, which is just cut off from the hallway by blackness. She disappears into the blackness. She goes into the room. There's slow motion. The camera's kind of fixed in place, kind of watching her, with the, I don't know, racerback dress, like showing her back and shoulders and stuff like that. And it's a very dramatic, slow shot, kind of lingering on that seduction that she's performing right now. It's so over the top for a fairly simple moment. But in context with the way the film presents itself, that is actually a big moment in the context of the political maneuvering and in the context of the world of Dune. That's part of why the film can get away with dramatizing a small moment like that so much, because it actually does have huge significance, and the film communicates scale so well that we understand that it is already depicting these huge moments, and we can associate a similar style there. But in addition to that, even without the actual scope of the event, the fact is the film is already very dramatic with its presentation. So it's not like dramatizing an individual shot is out of the norm. The film is already very dramatically presented. There's already slow motion in other spots. So the general aesthetic of the film and the purpose of the shot fit in with everything else the film has been establishing. I'll say one more thing. I really like the fact that the Fremen become kind of an unstoppable force towards the end of the film and into that final battle. Sometimes it's fun to just have the hero feel invincible and like they can't be stopped. The way they approached that battle and built up certain aspects of the characters leading up to that moment makes for such a triumphant and rewarding experience watching them just steamroll their opponents. So there's a few things that build up the level of triumph and make the overrun of, the opposing forces so rewarding. One is, of course, the revenge for Paul. The destruction of his house by the Harkonnen in the first film is one of the, or perhaps the primary action set piece of the film. So that was a big moment that gets paid off here a film later. So we have been following Paul pretty closely. So we have extra ties to him, especially because of this movie. And that aspect of revenge gets some payoff here. And it's great to see him just run over the kind of comically evil Harkonnen on his way. But we also get revenge for the people of Fremen. And not just revenge plain and simple by itself, but also revenge for them using the planet, using the storm as an element, using the worms as an attack mechanism. Because there's some irony there with the way they use those compared to the way that the rest of the galaxy is kind of harvesting their goods without regard for the Fremen. The fact that the Fremen are able to use their knowledge of the planet to flip the situation on the invaders is really rewarding. And also, there's the fact that this isn't an immediate payoff. None of this is. This stuff has all been brewing for an entire movie. If this had just happened, all within the same movie, that might not be enough time to let things stew and let the tension and the hope for Paul and the Fremen to get revenge and get justice against the invaders. That might not have enough time to build up if it's just one movie. But the fact is, they've let it sit for a while. They've let us see the work they're putting in, the struggles they have to face, the guerrilla warfare, finally being able to build up to a full attack against the people who were oppressing them. And I think a combination of all those things just makes for a great experience watching them just run over the enemy as they're attacking them on their home planet. I do kind of wish the movie continued that a little bit longer and made the fight with Paul and the Baron's son a little more one-sided. I suppose just for the sake of a climax, you want to have a close fight. But to me, I would just rather see Paul be able to still continue to dominate and push towards the throne. It's not a huge gripe, but I guess I would have liked to see Paul dominate the final fight and continue that wave as he goes along. I will say, though, actually, I'll tack on an extra point. Don't even have this in my outline. But I did really enjoy the couple of hand-to-hand combat scenes, especially the fact that they're cut pretty sparsely. You get to see a number of different moves before cuts in, especially that final fight scene, with a lot of intensity and movement. It's honestly pretty impressive that they're able to, pull off such a convincing fight. Also a great touch that the score was completely gone, I believe, in that fight scene as well, so you're just kind of lingering with the tension. And then also there's, I believe, a hand-to-hand combat scene just outside of the pyramids during the invasion. That's also quite nice. A longer take with some good fighting in view. So I appreciate the action scenes in this movie, the hand-to-hand combat especially. And then even beyond all that stuff, there's, plenty of great epic shots. Shots of the sandworms being ridden, or, pick your scene of people arriving out of smoke, or the couple of shots from the beginning with the Harkonnen soldiers kind of levitating up the rocks to escape from the worms. Yeah, there's no shortage of good visual stuff here either. So that's of course no different than Dune 1, which also that was one of its main strengths. But yeah, there's lots of good to appreciate in these movies, and glad to watch them. They're not my favorites or anything, but I'm very glad they exist. I'm glad that there are directors who can make, such rich and fantastical worlds for people to consume, As much as I'm more of a, smaller scale character drama or thriller kind of guy, it is great to be able to see such a huge, unique world visualized for so many people to see. And this is just a movie that makes me happy to watch. Makes me happy that someone can make good movies like this.